Our next topic on early modern Southeast Asian societies is about social organization in the early modern period. When we think about social organization, what do we mean? Social organization usually refers to a system of characterizing society and social relations. It's a way of understanding how societies were organized during their period. It indicates how people relate to the state and to other people. So, was there some kind of hierarchy or stratification already in place in Southeast Asia? The basic answer to that question is yes. That in fact, Southeast Asian societies were seen as vertically organized societies, which meant that everyone in the society was linked in a hierarchical structure to everyone else. One is born into a family ranked within the larger society. And the position in the society can be determined by either slavery, bondage, from debt is most common, and different variety of forms of obligation, including hereditary. I think it's very important to understand that during this period, what was most important for societies was control over manpower. And this control over manpower was significantly more central to organizing society than, for example, control over land and territory. And I think it's very easy to understand why. During this period, people thought that land was infinite, that there was so much land and territory around them, while manpower or people were limited or finite, right? So that means that the more people and the more people and manpower you have, then the richer and stronger your society was, because these people could be translated into labor, right? So they will be important in terms of reproducing your wealth either through agriculture or going to war, etc. So I think it's really important to understand that in the early modern period, which is a big contrast, of course, to our contemporary period, when in fact land has become more finite and has become more important, sometimes more important than people, which now is considered as infinite, or there's just a lot more people than land in the present juncture. Right. So, but then the understanding of the role of manpower was very important in understanding the social organization in Southeast Asian society. Because vertical bonding was determined by three main factors. Manpower, not land, is the basis of power and status, that individuals or families that possess or have control over people, such as dependents, slaves, etc., have greater power and status. And human transactions are generally expressed in monetary terms. Humans have so called cash value, or are capital assets due to long experience in commerce in Southeast Asia. And the states at that point were also relatively weak, with ineffective legal systems, which places greater emphasis on local level protection, on bonding with local protectors, nobles, monks, generals, patrons, which emphasizes personalistic ties and relations. So, the other major question when understanding social organization in Southeast Asia is the question of slavery. Was there slavery in pre colonial Southeast Asian society? Again, the simple answer to that question is yes, but we should remember or understand that slavery was very different in this context. That in fact, slavery was not the same as Americans associated with the kind of slavery that Africans were submitted to in the Caribbean or North America. It wasn't the type of slavery where humans were sold in public as chattel in chains or frequently separated from families. That in fact, Southeast Asian forms of slavery could be better described as bondage, since nearly everyone in the society was bonded to a client, to someone above them in status, title, wealth, or power. Nearly everyone was a client to someone, even nobles, monks, and notables. Everyone was ranked in relation to those above and below them in the social hierarchy. To be free, in fact, in the modern Western sense, would have been like being outside society without a patron or protector, possibly with no means of support or survival. To release a slave or bondsman did not mean freedom, since one remained linked to others in the social hierarchy and one would soon reattach, becoming the client of someone with higher status. Categories of slaves or bondsmen are based on whether one performed labor, and if so, what kind of labor, usually from manual to supervision. In fact, these types of debts were also inherited, and partly because even when parents died in this period, then it's assumed that their children will then be under the protection of their patron. Common laborers, cultivators, and soldiers, many of whom served interchangeably in these livelihoods, were often at the lowest place in the society, treated more as slaves with fewer options for freedom of movement or for bettering their lives. So again, what's really important is to understand what slavery was in this period. In the 19th and early 20th century, witnessed the collapse of traditional Southeast Asian systems of social organization. Nevertheless, virtually vertically organized systems of social organization persisted nearly everywhere, with the most common being the patron-client relationships. And this patron-client relationship occurs in a variety of changing relations, either ruler-dependent, leader-follower, creditor-debtor, landlord-tenant, employer-employee, politician, and voter-citizen. It's also really important to understand that a patron-client relationship is a mutually reciprocal relationship with reciprocal obligations between the two parties. The patron provides protection and patronage. It provides loans, material, jobs, favors, especially in times of need, crisis, or ritual expenditures, while the client serves the patron in many ways. They labor the chief form of service, of course, with a wide range of jobs, mostly manual, even as soldier enforcer, as tenant or sharecropper, as loyal political supporter with votes, etc. Most Southeast Asian societies today function through complex patron-client networks, linking clients vertically with patrons. So the other important issue in terms of understanding social organization is thinking about the relations between men and women. In the area of culture, Southeast Asia has in part been defined by the place women have traditionally and currently play in society. So it's really important to understand the relations between men and women, that women were not necessarily equal to men, but in fact, they had different or independent functions. And it's also important to know that what really makes women made women have a special role in society was it's because of their reproductive role, which gave them magical and ritual powers which were difficult for men to match. So there are two major factors that stand out in understanding pre-colonial gender relations and the role of women in Southeast Asia. First, in terms of economic importance, and second, in terms of high female autonomy. First, let's talk about the economic importance of women. There was, of course, a sexual division of labor in Southeast Asia, where male and female have different spheres of activity. The men were in charge of plowing, clearing fields, hunting, metalworking, woodworking, house building, statecraft, and formal religion, while women were very active in the role with their role in production. They're active in the agricultural economy, especially in harvesting and transplanting rice, growing vegetables rather than paddy, food preparation, weaving, pottery making, marketing, practitioners or mediums of the informal or animistic religious practices, and generally managers of money. Though there are labor activities that are not unlike in many rural areas, Southeast Asian women, more than other Asian women, are entered into the male spheres of domains, especially in terms of marketing, which was a major female role, which often transferred to managing household finances and businesses. They will also have very important political roles or powers. First, as I said, the reproductive role gave them magical and ritual powers, which were difficult for men to match, which meant that the women were very much part of the rituals and also healing of the community. Women also had, in terms of their political role, a very strong role in diplomacy. Though most rulers are male, women frequently played the role as representatives of rulers, the ones who negotiated with other Southeast Asians and with other Europeans. This is often a recognition of women's superior language skills derived from their commercial activities, especially marketing. Some have argued women practiced different gender specific cultural priorities. They were less concerned with male desire for revenge, for example, or recourse to violence, and thus made them better peacemakers and negotiators. There are also some societies in Southeast Asia where there were women or female heroes and warriors. Many female heroes are throughout Southeast Asian history, the most famous being the Trung sisters, who were Vietnamese rebels against the Chinese in the early modern period. Women often served also as bodyguards at court for the kings, especially in maritime Southeast Asia. There were also some women as rulers and political figures. They were less common because there were still male dominated kingship prevailed, but the slow spread of Islam in many maritime areas gave rise to more female political figures, but Islam eventually removed women from these roles, and so did Christianity and other religions. Women were also very active in traditional performance. Women dominated in traditional forms of arts, dance, drama, music, entertainment, even in reading, reciting, composing chronicles, epics, etc. And as I said, they were very much engaged in traditional forms of healing or spirit mediumship, which were dominated by women, which of course also displaced the coming of the religion also displaced them from their roles. Finally, women had high female autonomy. And the key areas of culture that influenced the autonomous role of women in society have been marriage, especially, and sexual relations. I think it's very important to understand that Southeast Asian women during this period differ significantly from their European counterparts and even other women in Asian societies. For example, in East Asia, particularly in China, they had the practice of foot binding and child brides and even infanticide, which those practices were not seen at all in Southeast Asia. In South Asia, they were also have arranged marriages, and the practice of sati or widow burning was something that women in Southeast Asia also did not practice, right? So women in that sense have very strong roles, especially in terms of marriage, divorce, and social relations. So what different areas did women exhibit their power in their autonomy? First, in terms of bilateral kinship. Descent is traced through both parents, with women sharing family identity, wealth, and inheritance. The bride wealth systems prevail, where the husband's family pays the wife's family or provide gifts to the bride, unlike widespread dowry systems that are more male dominated. The systems were also matrilocal, which meant that couples live with their wife's family or in wife's village, or they can if they choose to live in the husband's family or village. And basically, they had the choice where to go, right? Either with the family of the woman and the family of the man. And going to the family of woman did not mean a demotion or a decrease in status. The bride or the woman can also own and inherit property or wealth. Married couples' property was shared, and all children, regardless of sex, would inherit that. Women also had an autonomous role in courtship. Women were actively participate in the search for their husbands. They can, without much pejorative, engage in premarital sex. There were all these whole cultural rituals which assume female participation in many parts of Southeast Asia. Divorce is common and can be initiated by women, and women can take their property at time of divorce without losing much, advantage or status, right? So there's also a high degree of monogamy or fidelity among both men and women traditionally. Neither is seriously censured for extramarital sexual relations. Finally, in terms of sexual relations, what really surprised a lot of Europeans or observers coming to Southeast Asia is how women had this very strong sexual desire, and how men, in fact, were very much concerned for female sexual satisfaction. And they were compelled to also sexually satisfy women. In fact, you could see some of this through these implements. Could you identify what these tools or implements are? So these are now found in different museums all over the world, right? Mainly in European museums. But do you know what they are? If you guessed this were penis pins or penis insertions, then you're right. I would leave it to your imagination how this works. But this these implements show the high level of concern for female sexual satisfaction. Most common example of this is the widespread use of penis pins or balls by men, which were excruciatingly painful insertion process, right? In order to sexually satisfy women. So why did men go through that? And I think the real question is really because of the high status of women. So just as a conclusion, the final observations, women in Southeast Asia enjoyed considerably more social autonomy than the contemporary European women and other women in the Asian region. So they were very strong in terms of their roles, their economic importance in society, and also their autonomy. And even with divorce, it could be initiated by women, but it did not reduce her status, her livelihood, her property, or her network of kin. Many of these practices, unfortunately, will be challenged by the coming of the major religions and, in fact, European colonialism. Thank you.